Everything on this channel so far represents us getting out, like absolute minimum, 2 hours from home and doing things that seem remarkable enough to make it into episodes. I can put a cloud of faraway locations here. Yeah. But winter in England when money is tight, the series which we ended up calling The Grey Days is all about getting through the winter. There's a whole playlist and we put an intro there to explain it a bit better. But not only does that imply staying indoors, but goodness knows the default is just staring out the window of your lounge on yet another dark night. So to at least get a change of scene locally, I decided it was worth a small-scale pub crawl around some of Dorset's best, and we really do have some great pubs here. Just a quick note, these are mostly around the Purbecks, but if you're not from around here, barely anyone knows what a Purbeck is, hence the title of the video, so don't be mad that this is not from Bridport or Sherborne. We're somewhat confining our day to this area of Dorset here. And the weather was not the superest. If it had been, this was New Year's Eve, for example, we'd be out seeing the coast and making the most, but on a cloudy, drizzly day, it's a good excuse to hit the pubs with the nice vibes and open fireplaces. I should just say, so far in this series, we're actually 12 months out of phase, so recapping what we did last winter. This is something we'd had in the diary, but the friends I was hoping to do it with, we just never managed to get a time, and then winter was over. But it is just the sort of smaller scale thing to do, which made the perfect sense for this series. So confusing the timeline somewhat, but this was just a few weeks back. Right, that's all good. Title drop. Well, beginning in Bournemouth, where we live, if you're new to the channel, quick macchiato before setting off. It wasn't raining at this point, but it was certainly very damp. There's the boating lake that forms on the way into Asda. It always looks so beautiful at this time of year. So, Bournemouth bus/coach interchange, not the most inspiring place to be. When I said we were undertaking some somewhat smaller trips, this does feel like we've maybe aimed a bit low, but other than all the coaches that leave to London, etc., there is also the first stop of the number 50, a brightly coloured double-decker that in summer is rammed floor to ceiling with tourists, but more prosaically is also the main public transport route to Swanage. We pulled out of the station. It's not the greatest day to be out and about. Normally you'd get a glimpse of Studland from here, but it was cloudy enough that nothing. The number 50 is also the only route that serves the roads by the coast in Bournemouth, so it takes the most circuitous route to get where it's going. Really iron skies over the sea as we got closer. I keep wanting to skim over things that just seem obvious to me, but then I realise that many of you watching will not know the Bournemouth area. So this is Sandbanks, famous for property prices so high you have to express them in standard form. On a day like today, not really the golden sunset view that I've photographed numerous times over the years. This is what life really feels like in England for much of the winter. Something that should be beautiful and inspiring, feeling just cold, flat and closed off. At the end of the spit of sand that forms the terminus of Bournemouth Beach is a narrow entrance to Poole Harbour. To get out to the Purbecks, it's either this narrow crossing or a 45-minute drive around Poole Harbour via Wareham. So this makes a certain sense if you don't mind paying for the chain ferry. The chain ferry is a fun thing to bring out of towners, like, this is a bit different. Makes for a nice prelude to what is usually a beautiful day out in some of the very best landscapes Dorset has to offer. Grey Days was absolutely about catching the landscapes under moody skies, so I've seen this maybe 30 times, all on glorious blue sky days. This, for better or worse, is a bit of a change. For reference, I'm used to seeing Shell Bay looking like this. But anyway, the rain was picking up as we touched down on the Purbeck side. We are getting to a pub shortly, I swear, but got off the bus and suddenly everything was very quiet. Just a silent veil of fine rain with the occasional drip from a tree. So this is the village of Studland. It's a pretty nice small place, just a few houses and this local store, but it's not without interesting things. So away from the main road there's this elaborate cross, which is a modern creation, though it looks like the base could be original. The rain was just easing off and caught some of the first crocuses I'd seen this year. It was the 1st of February, so just in the brief window to catch these. And this is St Nicholas, a rather fine Norman church from sometime in the 1100s, though there's a possibility it was slightly earlier. I've filmed this frequently enough that there's not much that I need to shoot now, though I was once again enjoying the line of corbels, each unique, that line the eaves. The chancel arch has a bit of a crack in it, but some nice Romanesque work. The tower is incredibly sturdy. It looks like it could just take an artillery shell without budging. And the graveyard was strewn with snowdrops. Anyway, we're right by our first stop. That's Old Harry Rocks down there. On a nicer day, that's where everyone goes for a walk before coming back for a drink here. We weren't going to quite have time for that today, what with the finite daylight, and it's around an hour loop all told, but just here was our first pub of the day. This is Banks Arms. In the summer, no shock, this outdoor area would be packed, but walking in, and sure enough, there's the open fire, and this place does in fact share the site with the Isle of Purbeck Brewery. It's a bit of a Dorset gem. So, to appreciate the local brews, I got one of each of these. Before you get the scale off, these are half pints. With the number of drinks I was hoping to try today, I think I'd be in Pool General before we'd even got round all the places we planned. So, the Seashell, yeah, that's okay. It's, of course, a lot lighter when compared to the Porter and the Winter Warmer. Yeah, the Winter Warmer definitely had some mulled wine hints to it. I'm assuming that's a deliberate choice. To be honest, I don't feel qualified to give in-depth tasting notes. I'll just get ratioed by the guys who put a lot of time and effort into these. But it was a strong start. I'm not so much into the ales usually, but wow, the taste really sets the scene. I was almost sad we didn't have a D&D game set up. It was getting pretty busy. I thought that arriving at 12 I'd be almost on my own, but no. Well, I thought I'd also try these. So yeah, a much darker selection than I'd normally drink, but the rich hoppy notes felt so much more appropriate for remote Dorset pubs with wooden beams in the ceilings. And at length I had some friends joining me. They share my lack of fondness for being on camera, so I didn't have it trained on their faces. We didn't stay at Banks too much longer. They had actually driven in, which admittedly did make the day smoother than my original plan, where we were going to chain together a mixture of buses and some walking. So, small drive past Swanage and a short way out of town. This is the village of Langton-Matravers. It's a pretty small community here. There's not like hours and hours you could spend here exactly, but there's something about the look of this part of Dorset where all the houses are made of the local Purbeck stone. Oh, it does make for the most gorgeous streets. If it weren't for the parked cars and, well, okay, maybe the asphalt as well, you could practically believe it was a couple of hundred years ago. There's a pub here. This is the King's Arms. It's a mixture of smaller rooms and narrow corridors, but with those little pub bits that accrue on the high shelves in places like this. They also have a pair of axolotls, which I did not realise that those were available commercially, but there you go. It was, again, pretty busy for a rainy Sunday afternoon in February. In fact, we had to seat ourselves in one section with minimal lighting for whatever reason. Somehow my camera just refused to focus on this, but it's a local brew to Swanage. It's surprisingly sharp in flavour for a lower percentage drink, but still nice. This was just a quick stop, so onwards, and not at all far along. Worth-Matravers is a pretty amazing place. It was just beginning to rain, so I didn't manage more than the briefest of wide shots, so pardon me if we have to cut to a summer's day a moment. We're not miles from the nearest town by any means. I mean, Swanage is only a 6-minute drive, and it's under an hour on foot, but somehow Worth-Matravers has remained this uniquely remote-seeming place. Like Langton-Matravers, small enough that spending a whole day there would be a stretch, but the most beautiful Purbeck stone, and it's also a gateway to some of the most remarkable views anywhere in England if you can just get down to St Aldham's Head. However, with the rain picking up, just quickly caught a glimpse of Woodhenge. This was built without any attention for archaeological evidence, and just because it looks cool, but it does look cool. And, since wooden monuments are so ephemeral in the archaeological record, we know the Neolithic and Bronze Age people were making wooden circles as well as stone circles. This is a not implausible impression of what these spaces may have been like. So rain picking up, we hurried inside the only business open in the village. This is the Square and Compass. It was kind of packed, and yeah, also tight corridors. This was originally built as 2 cottages in the 1700s before being transformed into a pub. The only free table was in the museum. Yes, this pub also has a mini museum, which is an absolute delight. It contains many fossils from the local area, as you might expect from somewhere along the Jurassic coast, but even better, it has a shockingly great selection of local archaeological finds from the Iron Age, Roman, all sorts. Considering there aren't any extant Roman structures anywhere near here, this is quite a haul. In fact, I was so distracted, I just hurriedly went with a local cider, which, considering the options, might have been an oversight on my part. Small thing about Square and Compass, not to be petty, but the last time I was here, and fair is fair, this was a while ago, it was pre-pandemic, I was taking a walk with friends. We'd covered a fair amount of the Jurassic Coast on a cloudy day, and getting to St Olm's Head, we needed somewhere to have a rest. So we got to the Square and Compass, and they just laughed in our faces when we asked if they took card. They just could not wait to rub it in the faces of the city dwellers like, ha, take card. I note in 2026, oh, what's this? You do take card. Oh, okay, maybe it's not such an unreasonable idea after all. It seems that Banks Arms, and I think also Scott Arms, are now card-only places. Anyway, with a pint and a pasty, and was also just preoccupied trying to snap all of the fines here. This is great stuff. The main dining room with the fireplace was packed and ridiculously toasty, almost edging into uncomfortably warm. But, okay, quibbles over payment methods aside, the Square and Compass does feel like a place out of time, an echo of pubs from decades, even centuries past, and quite rightfully, it is very highly regarded in the county, a very cosy pub indeed. Well, another short drive down the road. This could have been a walk, it's only 2 miles, though admittedly with the rain coming down was definitely grateful for the cars. And it's the Scott Arms. Had to hurry inside with just a quick shot of the exterior. This is another absolute Dorset gem. It sits above Corfe Castle and offers the most ridiculous views from the garden, just about visible today through the rain. It doesn't quite have the local selection of the others, but this is another local cider, so cool. Much as going to some nice pubs in winter is far from a revolutionary concept, the idea for this first germinated when I was sitting in the Scott Arms. I just caught the sundown at Kimmeridge, so a bit of a walk, but the darkness had taken over. This was before I could drive, by the way. In fact, it was the winter before my son was born, and I was not feeling great about the future. At that time, I pictured just being stuck in place, unable to do the things I loved, my world sort of shrinking down to just my household and scarcely being able to get out and about. And yeah, that feeling is the pervasive winter mood that casts this dark, damp blanket across everything. Well, that did not turn out to be the case. Having a son has turned out to be an absolute joy, a huge surprise in the best possible way. I wish I could show you how unbelievably cute and lovable he is, but the internet is awash with creeps and bots scraping for fascist AI slop farms, so best not. But all the things that have been possible since then, either with my family or solo, if I think back to how I was feeling and get into that mindset and then think about how things are now, it's just a testament to how things really can get better. Even this winter was already turning out far better than the last. I was feeling so much brighter. I don't have something incredibly profound here for anyone who's really going through it. I don't want to automatically equate whatever depressive patterns I've got into with yours. There's a good chance yours are far worse. I'm incredibly fortunate to have a family and friends that I can turn to when I'm getting really down. There's people kind of looking out for me, and I'm so grateful for that. But the potential for things to vastly improve is always there. I think back to a low point, a year, 2 years or more back. If you can remember where you were and how hopeless it felt, and then think of all the things that came after that, I can't guarantee it, but there is just the highest chance that better times followed. High points, sunsets, memories. If you can plot the change from how you felt to what came next, and it's hard to do, it can really be hard to see through. You might not really feel it right now, but there are better things to come. It is just so statistically unlikely that the trend is eternally down. It is so much more likely that in just a month or two, you will have things that you're so glad you didn't miss. They will be worth the wait. It is worth seeing what is still to come. If nothing else, the low points just punctuate the high points to make them all the more amazing. So yeah, great to be back at the Scott Arms. We headed out, and because of the way I'd timed the day, to allow time for taking the buses and walking, we wrapped up actually way earlier, before it even got dark. As we drove back, Wareham being at its floodiest, as was most of low-lying Dorset at this point, stranger yet, it was raining quite heavily, but the sun was also setting in a distant gap in the clouds, making for some very dramatic skies. So that was it. It was a pretty good use of a day where otherwise getting much done outside would have been a bit of a damp, dead loss. In fact, I was already eyeing other places I could add to the list. It's the classic thing. I'd said I wanted to do some smaller scale episodes, but I did want to add more than just 4 pubs to the list. So we did. Second title drop. Well, okay, we are actually going to be a bit quick quicker about this. The first 4 we'd hit were our priorities, whereas the next batch somewhat less so, but they were definitely worth it. Well, wind forward 2 weekends. Had in fact just 24 hours previous been out in Dorset, if folks recall, February had been near constant rain. We were breaking all kinds of meteorological records up and down the country, and we got just one day of pretty decent sunshine. So I got a bunch of students out to Dorset, many of whom had not been to these places before, and we hit St Aldham's Head, got very muddy but a good time all round. The plan was to hit Corfe Castle, but oops, a sunny day at the beginning of the school half-term break, and you were expecting to find parking spaces? So we just dipped into Wareham for coffee instead. I was driving and I had the boy weasel with me, so good time had by all, but not hitting any pubs at this point. So all well and good. Just an aside at this point, do remember to check out the Grade Age playlist after this. We've got an increasing pile of episodes from the various ways we've been getting through the winter, and we could use some help with those. Yeah, YouTube has been nothing if not massively inconsistent on whether it'll bother to show anyone our stuff. So, 24 hours later, it was another Sunday afternoon, and the weather here was particularly gross, not looking good at all. And while I had sketched out a mixture of trains and buses, was once again made much easier by Sean opting to drive. Oh yeah, by the way, this time it was Sean and Cal. It's those guys, veterans of the collective. We've been all over from Jordan to Exmoor. Well, our first stop was Wareham, and while trying to avoid getting wet, had a look at the swamped fields. This still astonishes me. I think we're going to have a mini episode on the floods this year because, well, I have some stuff to show you guys, but at this point we were just hurrying along, trying not to get too wet. Quickest glance at St Martin on the Walls, that's the Saxon church in Wareham, and hurried inside here. Yes, while looking less handsome for the scaffolding next door, this is the King's Arms, and you can see why we're here. It's the low ceilings, open fire combo all over again. There is something so unbearably tedious about being the guy who goes in somewhere like this, bearing in mind this is a place primarily for locals, and being like, have you got anything local? The non-too-subtle implicature being, hi, superior being here. Your mass-produced, easily recognisable brands are not suitable for my luminous frame. I demand something artisanal. A glance around didn't reveal anything especially local, but there was this ale from Cornwall, so sure, okay, and it was fine. So this is a nice spot. It's touched itself up a little with some paint on the walls, bit of attention to colour in a way aging pubs would not, but a lot to love. And for a rainy day, I mean, yeah, great. And then out of nowhere, and bear in mind, it had been pretty foul all day. I had a 7 a.m. call time for church that morning, and it had been raining this entire time. And then within about a 5-minute span, it went from rain to suddenly very much not. So, hadn't really prepared for that outcome, but okay. While the water was still dripping from the thatch, this was a marked improvement. Poked our heads around the door of St Martin's. This is a pretty special place. Its earliest fabric is about 1,000 years old. It's quite an unusual shape, not having many later upgrades to its footprint. As well as this lovely chancel arch with some wall painting surviving, it has an effigy of T.E. Lawrence, otherwise known as Lawrence of Arabia, though he's actually buried a few miles down the road. Well, moving along, and while there is a bus stop here, we parked up at the Halfway Inn. I hadn't been here in a number of years. I remember having good food here. This is, of course, somewhat traditional, but it's also been smartened up, so it's more of a gastropub. Got the log burners going. Ended up with a pint of this. It's somewhat local from Blandford, so what's that, 15 miles down the road? Yeah, okay. We did, in fact, order some food, so while I was waiting on that, just got a bit of a better look at the landscape. The Heartland Moor area is pretty great for walks in summer. It's understandably damp right now. You could see our next target off in the distance. The food was good. I just got the hummus, which was pretty good. They did that thing where you only have a few small pieces of bread, so each bit ends up having to be heaped as tall as you can get it just to get through all of it. But anyway, a nice spot, a lot to appreciate here. And on our way, not far down the road, Corfe Castle. It's the nature of things that because the village has also been named Corfe Castle, that technically makes this Corfe Castle, because who doesn't love a tautology? Not looking its absolute prettiest at this stage thanks to this scaffolding, but a little self-care is important. Well, unsurprisingly, one of Dorset's highlights. It's not hard to see Corfe Castle as a bit of a toy town village. It does feel somewhat less than real, but it's the village itself that is particularly special, not just the ruined castle that looms above it. We had a couple of places to dip in. First, the Bank's Arms. I don't know if this is linked to the other Banks harms we'd seen in Studland. It's named after Lady Banks, who managed to hold Corfe Castle during the English Civil War with only a handful of people. It was one of the last royalist holdouts in the entire country, and it's also the reason the castle looks the way it does nowadays. It was slighted by the parliamentarians after it fell. So this place is kind of lovely. Nice open fireplace. I got the Dorset Pale and the Orchard Haze. Something about that pairing in particular, really good. I don't know why. I honestly can't express the feeling of being in this part of Dorset. It's this completely unique oeuvre which I feel unable to adequately convey in words or music. These images can't fully capture it. It just feels amazing, especially at dusk and with the skies clearer. I forget, while I crave being out in the world beyond the British Isles and exploring elsewhere, and while Corfe Castle is scarcely 40 minutes from my house, it is just such a treat to be out here. So we sat in the Banks, watching through the windows, eventually decided just to poke our heads into the Greyhound across the road. I remember this being slightly posh, and I wanted to see if it was... Oh, okay, never mind. It wasn't quite 5:30, but we opened the door, and instantly someone was like, sorry, we're closed. Okay. Apparently they close at 6 on Sunday. It wasn't even that yet, but not wanting to finish the day quite yet. This is just round the corner, the Fox Inn. And this was a great spot, open fire, just nice vibes in general. Figured I'd try the Moonlight again, as well as this local cider that I forgot to snap. So this had been a great time, a bunch of cosy pubs with friends. Not hard to see why this felt so good. As we've been hinting, there's so many more places we need to show you across the Jurassic Coast specifically, and Dorset more generally in a little bit. So we did. Third intro... No, don't be silly. You've already seen the runtime. We're not doing that. But I am pleased to have turned the arc of pubs we visited into a rather pleasing crescent. On a summer's day, you could hit all of these in a single day if you timed it out. So, wrapping things up there, if you enjoy the music in the background, it's ours. We make all the music for these episodes, and you can find it on bandcamp.com. If you want to support the channel, that's the best place to do this. As I said, playlists is a major part of what we do. We have the Hill Forts playlist from last year. That was a massive undertaking that we're still part way through. We've got the Grey Days playlist for lots of episodes a bit like this. You can see all manner of things. We've got a playlist of all our episodes from Greece, which we're continuing to add to. So yeah, check those out. Otherwise, you can follow us on Blue Sky. These episodes are quite time consuming to make, whereas on Blue Sky, we can be showing you what we're up to on more of a week-by-week basis. And yes, please subscribe and hit the bell. Otherwise, YouTube just doesn't generally show people our stuff, and we'll catch you pretty soon.